So far, you understand what worldview is. It's the lens through which we perceive and respond to reality.
You might even buy into the idea that understanding worldview is important to understanding yourself, other people, and even the Bible.
You might have even made connections that understanding worldview is vital to growing in intercultural competence and to becoming better cross-cultural representatives of King Jesus because, as Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand and then be understood.
But how does this play out in reality?
How do we begin to make these connections and observations?
In this video, we'll share with you 6 stories that highlight some aspects of the 3 worldview paradigms that might help you begin to make observations in your past and current context.
Coming right up. Hi friends, welcome back to Global Semester, where our passion is to journey with motivated and purpose-driven followers of King Jesus, and together to learn to become better cross-cultural representatives of Jesus both locally and globally. I'm Jose.
And I'm Jocelyn.
The purpose of these anecdotes is not to convey whether these aspects are right or wrong.
They're just observations that we remember and have resonated with us.
And sometimes we'll shorten innocence guilt to IG, honor shame to HS, and power fear to PF. I grew up mostly influenced by the innocence guilt worldview, from schools, books, and life here in the west coast of British Columbia. I find that when teaching something or trying to prove something, we IG people like to use facts, empirical data, and logical reasoning. We like to proof text, authoritative text like the Bible or science textbook, or more recently, Google, to convince people to do something or to behave a certain way. We also like quick, short, pithy quotations from famous people because, as Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand and then be understood. And I also remember this book in my childhood called The Book of Virtues by William Bennett. I think it represents the epitome of Western IG worldview. It teaches moral virtues like courage, compassion, honesty, and loyalty through poems, fables, and stories from American, European, biblical, and ancient Greek literature. And this is where the IG worldview comes out. The first section of this book is on self-discipline, which highlights the important value of taking in all these virtues, learning them, and applying them all by ourselves.
This is an anecdote that highlights honor and shame. Some friends of ours had just moved into a city in the Middle East, and they rented their place from a Middle Eastern landlord. He was pretty easygoing and nice. The place was like a duplex where the landlord and his family lived on the other side. Our friends had mentioned that they would be using the place to host some guests from North America and that they would be having their language class there. Everything seemed to be going well until a few weeks later when the landlord started to behave differently and wanted to discuss whether our friends wanted to keep staying there or not. In a way, it was an indirect way of saying, you need to leave. Our friends wondered why the sudden change. After a few meetings and conversations with the neighbor, they discovered that the neighbors around them started talking about men and women coming in and out of the compound. So in the eyes of the neighbors, the landlord was shamed because they started wondering if there were unsavory activities that were happening during the daytime and with so many people watching. The landlord, even though he had a good relationship with our friends and he knew about the guests, had been pressured to restore his honor and to dispel any shame from his neighbors. He was forced to give them an ultimatum, either to leave or to stop all of the activities and guests.
So here's an example from our experience in West Africa that highlights the power-fear worldview. It was during one of the national elections. One day, one of our West African friends asked us to pray for the disappearance of a little girl in town that we lived in. Our friend is a follower of Jesus, but he had grown up among animistic people groups, people who continued to practice tribal rituals and beliefs. Now, this disappearance of this girl from his ethnic background really worried him. And it wasn't exactly for the same reason that we were thinking. For him and his ethnic community, they were afraid that this girl had been abducted to be sacrificed because there is a belief among other people groups that blood from this people group could bring luck during elections. This is a reality in power-fear worldviews. A couple of days later, thankfully, the girl was found safe and sound.
Like most Canadian-born Chinese, we grew up in both IG and HS worldview environments. honor shame from our parents and extended families, and sometimes our friends. Innocence guilt from our schools and society in general. So it's not uncommon to experience tension in both. Here's an example of a tension that we've heard of in many of our CBC friends. One friend grew up with an interest in art and filmmaking, but he had more traditional parents who didn't think highly of these types of vocation. They are not what could be considered as stable, well-paying, and acceptable in traditional Asian cultures. Asian parents would prefer their children to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, business people, or accountants. These are jobs that are well respected and are sufficient to provide for the needs of the family and to save up for the education of the next generation so that they can pursue these honorable vocations.
As I said in the previous example, we lived in West Africa for a few years, and this is a story that we experienced from a different and smaller town. This is an example of when my IG worldview sensibilities were challenged by the PF worldview. One night, we received a visit from one of our coworkers who told us the news that one of our West African friends had been missing since that afternoon. He had been playing with his friends at a nearby waterfall, and as young people do, they would swim, dive, hang out, and play. The next morning, I joined the search mainly to pray and to show solidarity with the family and the community. There were already lots of capable and able-bodied people from town who swam, dove, and searched the nearby areas. After some time, a marabout arrived. Marabout is the French term for religious teacher, but is often also considered as a person of power, who would prescribe rituals, incantations, and fetishes to help people. So this marabout lady came and performed sacrifices to water spirits to release the body. She said some words I couldn't understand, and she threw some bananas, oranges, apples, other fruits into the water. And of course, the body was found the next day. Now to me, scientifically, the gases produced in the decomposing body was what caused it to float. But this action perpetuated belief in the ritual and the spirits. Now months later, now dealing with another issue at hand, it was a moral and ethical misconduct by one of the leaders of the local church. This brought several key leaders from the national church to our town. Their meetings went on for days, and we only heard about what happened in the meetings. Instead of dealing with the moral and ethical violation of the current matter at hand and punishment for the perpetrator, it was the West African church pastor who was disciplined. You see, he was the father of our friend who died in that waterfall accident. And he was there while the search went on and the marabout performed her ritual. This West African church pastor was disciplined because he allowed the marabout to perform the ritual during the search and rescue of his missing son. Now, in my IG worldview, the ethical misconduct was important and called for justice. However, for the West African church leaders, they considered the pastor's lapse in judgment was graver from a PF worldview standpoint. Like I said earlier, allowing the marabout to perform her ritual perpetuated belief in the ritual and the spirits. And in a way, it undid what the national church was trying to do, to turn followers of Jesus from their old ways of attaching power to people, things, and places towards the power of the Holy Spirit, the very life-giving presence of King Jesus in their lives.
Instead of ending with something that may be foreign for many of you, here's another example of HS worldview colliding with IG worldview. We were in a Zoom meeting some time ago, and we were put into breakout rooms to share with each other. When we met back with the larger group, our small group spokesperson disclosed how the whole group hadn't done something that we should have done. In that larger group, this spokesperson was cautioned playfully that perhaps he should not have shared that to the larger group. When we went into breakout rooms again, he apologized and said that he thought honesty was still a virtue. Some thought that was fine since honesty is the best policy, right? But for others, that was shaming them and causing them to lose faith and therefore lose trust. As a result, they became more cautious in sharing things within the group.
So, what did you think?
Did any of these stories sound familiar to you in your experiences?
And which ones were so far out there for you?
Comment below.
And it would be interesting to know your experiences too.
If you found this video helpful, consider hitting the thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of upcoming videos.
And we're also compiling a list of questions for a question and response video in the coming weeks to air around December 2020.
If you haven't checked out the previous videos on missional engagement, you can click here to watch them.
And if you haven't watched the previous videos on Worldview, you can click here.
So until next time, stay safe, be kind, and do things that would bring honor to King Jesus. Peace, loving kindness, and faithfulness to you.
To explode when...
I told you not to knock anything down. What's going on? Like inadvertent.
So, what did you think?
Oh, I was supposed to go after you.
Peace
Loving kindness.
and faithfulness, friends.
What happened to your ending of shalom?
That is it.
Oh, you're changing it up.
Good.
Okay, where's my M&Ms?